The topic for discussion this morning is the need for Holy Mother's universal love today. Now, talking about Holy Mother is a very, very complex effort because of the holy trio of Ramakrishna tradition. Holy Mother seems to be the most complex and the subtlest topic for discussion. We can easily talk about Swamiji in relative terms because Swamiji is intellectual and he was a scholar. He gave a number of lectures. He wrote books. So there is one way to grasp him intellectually. And Sri Ramakrishna, of course, instructed many of his disciples with the help, in the light of parables, stories, analogies taken from different scriptures. Swamiji has the halo of a great prophet, and Sri Ramakrishna has the halo of a great spiritual prophet, an incarnation. But Holy Mother, on the other hand, seems to be rather inaccessible in one way and the most accessible in another perspective. In fact, the idea of worshipping God as the mother of the universe has got a special significance. In our human life, the relationship between the child and mother is the most intimate, the purest, and the most informal one. You can approach your mother at any time, in any way. In fact, there's a tradition in Vedantic heritage which says that the respect to be given to the mother is 1,000 times as much as the respect to be given to father. I shall quote this verse because it is a very famous tradition. Manu, it is stated the Manu Smriti. Manu was a great lawgiver who lived around maybe 1400 years BC. And he says, Upadhyaya Dashacharya Acharya tu Shatam Pita. Sagasrena Adhigam Mathu Gaurivena Adirichyate. This is the famous Sanskrit verse. Upadhyaya is a lecturer, maybe part-time lecturer. Somebody goes to the university, may give a few lectures. In Hindu Vedantic tradition, Vedic tradition, Upadhyaya is a person who teaches one branch of Vedas, not the whole Vedic law. Acharya is a great scholar who teaches the whole Vedas. Let us say a senior professor or a reader of a university, in modern terms. Okay, now the respect to be given to a professor is, Dashacharya means, is 10 times as much as the respect that you give to a visiting lecturer. It doesn't mean that you should completely ignore visiting lecturer. But traditionally, now the respect to be given to mother is 100 times as much as the respect and honor that give to a professor. Because a child learns from mother first. He doesn't really learn, he imbibes. Child learns culture, tradition, everything as the child sits at the lap of the mother. It's not learning, imbibing. It's never forgotten, in fact. Now, the respect to be given to father is 100 times the respect to be given to a professor. The respect to be given to mother is 1,000 times. Sagasrena adhigam matuhu. Means the respect for mother is 1,000 times as much as the respect to be given to the father. Now, this is the tradition. If you come to Holy Mother, you find on the one hand a giant, a mighty, universal spiritual teacher. On the other hand, a very ordinary village woman, not educated in the formal sense of the term. But she was the great educator of the best educated intellectuals of her time. She was a teacher to the most intellectual, some of the most intellectual giants of her generation, Swami Vivekananda, arguably the most brilliant graduate of Calcutta University and one of the greatest intellectual giants of 19th century, who actually is responsible for all that we understand today as Oriental wisdom. Many of us perhaps do not remember. You have got hundreds of yoga studios all over the United States. There would not have been a single yoga studio if Vivekananda had not come to this country in 1893. People who stand on their heads and people who talk about mindfulness often forget that but for a Vivekananda, there won't be a single yoga studio, Vikram studio, none of this. Even if you go to American airports, you find yoga. There's a place for practicing yoga. None of this would have existed if Vivekananda had not come to this country. And he was, according to many intellectuals of Europe and America, in 19th century, one of the greatest celebrities who attended the Parliament of Religion, which drew on one platform most of the great intellectuals of 19th century, the later half of 19th century. That Vivekananda thought that he could do something for Vedanta, for Hindu with tradition, because of mother's blessings. And before coming over here, he sought mother's blessings. And mother herself was not at all an intellectual. She could only speak in her own native tongue. Now she was the inspirer, the teacher, the guru of hundreds of spiritual seekers who included the greatest intellectuals, advanced spiritual seekers, and also common, ordinary people, housewives who are facing problems in their day-to-day struggles while performing the responsibilities of their normal household affairs. Now, I can just give one example, just one instance. I'm going to read out one portion. One of the uniqueness of mother as a teacher was that she expressed her love, the spiritual universal love, by tackling some of the most complex, subtle spiritual problems that we all face in our everyday life situations. The conflicts, the problems. Often when we turn to spiritual life, we are confronted by one great problem. If God is so merciful, why should there be so many problems in this world? Now, this question is often a big problem for great theologians like Augustine. If you read Augustine's Confessions of St. Augustine, you read about how he underwent a conversion. He was a very worldly minded person and very talented. And his own mother used to pray to God to show a path to this fellow. Now, Augustine underwent a complete transformation, and he writes in his Confessions. One day, while sitting somewhere, he felt a voice coming towards him, read one particular chapter of the Bible, and he took the book and opened a page, and he read a sentence, and that became an inspiring force in his life. Now, even Augustine also discusses this problem. If God is so merciful, why should there be problems in this world? Now, this question comes to us, to common spiritual seekers, and also the greatest theologians of the world. How Mother tackles this problem. I'm just giving one example. I shall read from one famous writings. It is attributed to Sister Devamata. Mother is speaking about the need to make effort with strong determination for our own spiritual progress. And Mother also speaks about the place of God's grace in our life. Human effort and God's grace. If God is merciful, why should there be problems in this world? And if God is merciful, then why should we make an effort? If everything happens by the grace of God, then why and how should I make my own effort? In one context, mother says, "My child, you have been extremely fortunate in getting this human life. Have intense devotion to God. One must work hard." Later she is going to speak about God's grace. So she speaks about the need for human effort, and later she is going to speak about the limitation of human effort. How one reconciles with the other. How can one achieve anything without effort? You must devote some time for prayer even in the midst of the busiest hours of the day. This is an advice given to Sister Devamata. And Mother gave the same type of instructions to housewives. Mind you, many of those who came to Mother were not advanced spiritual seekers. Some of them were beginners. They just wanted some peace of mind. In fact, spirituality is a very complex phenomenon, but one unmistakable sign of spirituality is peace of mind, within and without, inner harmony and tranquility within, and inner harmony and tranquility in our interaction with people around us. That is one unmistakable sign of spirituality. All people turn to God, to religion, and also come to Alima retreat. For what? Because they want to fill a vacuum that they feel within us. When we advance in spiritual life, when we go forward in our natural evolution, cultural evolution, we reach a stage where we feel it's not enough to have food, clothing, social security or Medicare. Beyond that, we feel an inner vacuum, yearning for something higher. In other words, we want peace of mind. And 99.9% of the people turn to God and spirituality for peace of mind. You may talk about contentment and happiness, and as I used to explain the Yoga Sutra, yamas and niyamas, contentment, happiness, and so on. But all these come in the form of inner peace. That's what we are looking for. In fact, the great intellectuals who went to Mother, including educated Western women like Sister Nivedita, and also ordinary housewives who lived around Calcutta or maybe coming from local villages in Bengal. All of them were looking for peace of mind, and they could get that from Mother. So, Mother says, this peace of mind will come only through spiritual effort to begin with, and by the grace of God at the end of the journey. So she says, you must devote some time for prayer even in the midst of the busiest hours of the day, in the midst of activities in our day-to-day life situations. In the midst of all this, you must pray. Pray not in a formal way, but you should find time for prayer in an informal way, mentally dedicating all that we do to God. That is a prayer. I used to be very busy during my days in Dakshineshwar, yet I did my prayer and meditation. Continue to pray without losing your heart. Everything will happen in time. How many cycles did the great saints of ancient times practice austerity? If not in this life, you will attain God in the next. If not in the next, it will be after that. is it so easy to realize God? Now, this is one part of Mother's instruction. That is, she says, in the midst of being engaged in our day-to-day duties and responsibilities, we must try to keep the mind on God. Now, that is very important, because if we don't do that, and if we confine our spiritual practice to a few hours in the morning and evening, sometimes there will be a gap, no connecting link between our formal spiritual practice and what we do, what we think at other times. So Mother says there should be a connecting thread, a connecting link between what we do and think and reflect in our normal course of activities, it's called secular activities, and spirituality. If there is no link between the secular and spiritual, we will not be able to spiritualize the secular. So, to begin with, we must connect the secular with the spiritual. Whatever we do, it's a great mistake to think, well, now for 8 hours I will work. No business with religion. No, nothing to do with God or religion or spirituality. Just absolute duties and responsibilities, forgetting everything else. And then the evening I will pray. It's a great mistake. We cannot do that. Because the tendencies and impressions that we gather during the early hours, during the time when we are engaged in the so-called secular activities, will create problems and conflicts when we try to pray and meditate. If both these activities are placed in watertight compartments. So there should be a connecting link, connecting thread between what we do in our everyday life situations, means when we are engaged in the so-called secular activities, and spiritual life. So even while being engaged in day-to-day activities, we must try to put our mind on God. That is a very important instruction. Now, austerity, worship, pilgrimage, the earning of money, one should do all these in the days of youth. So it's very interesting. So, common people, they have to work, they have to earn money, they have to look after their household. So all these should be done. But along with that, pilgrimage, austerity, worship, spiritual practices should be done together. That's the first important instruction given by Mother is, we should not put these two in two different boxes. Then spiritual activities, spiritual practices, reading holy scriptures, japa, meditation in one box, one side. And then day-to-day activities, the so-called secular duties and responsibilities in another box. Or both should be put in the same box. Mid-box is our life. Or there should be a connecting link between the two. So Mother says, in old age the body deteriorates. It does not possess any strength. The mind loses vigor. Is it possible to do anything at that time? So my child, austerity or worship, practice all these things right now. Will these things be possible later on? Whatever you want to achieve it now. This is the right time. So Mother continues her instructions, stressing on the need for self-effort. Now here is a problem. Sometimes what happens is, we practice hard, japa, meditation, and so on for long years. And then we confront a big problem, which is sometimes called dark night of the soul. A period of obstacles, a period of inexplicable inner conflicts. Suddenly, we may think, well, I have done so much, but I have not achieved anything. so everything gone waste. I am not making any progress. It is not true. According to Mother, even the feeling that we are not making enough progress is a clear sign that we are making progress. Sometimes called, a kind of spiritual discontentment. It itself is a sign that we are already entered the track. Another important instruction that Mother gives is this. We should not try to connect what we do with what result is produced. We should not always relate our action with its consequences. Now, I am going to read another part of Mother's instruction which deals with this particular topic. Normally, when we do something, we expect a result. If you go to a market, if you buy something, if you pay $10, you naturally get something in return. So we always link renunciation of $10 with a packet that we receive from Trader Joe's. So there is a connecting link. So whatever we do, we relate it to some tangible, visible result that we can enjoy. In spiritual life, this is totally wrong. Spiritual life begins, the inner contentment comes only when we break the link between what we do and its immediate result. Spirituality is just the antithesis of utilitarianism or pragmatism. That's what Mother is going to stress. It's a very revealing idea in spiritual life. Most of the problems and conflicts arise because we did so much, we feel we have prayed for several years, but we don't feel peace of mind. We feel an inner vacuum. So, how to explain this? So much of effort and no result. That's why we feel discontentment. But the real cause of this discontentment is that we feel we have done something, and therefore what we have done should produce some tangible result. Now, Mother is in a very half humorous but in a strong language is dealing with this problem. God is not like fish or vegetable that you can buy him for a price. So I have meditated for long years. I have not realized God. Therefore Vedanta is wrong. Or Jesus is wrong. Buddha is wrong. Sometimes it becomes agnosticism. People sometimes feel this way. Why? Because they feel, well, I have paid a price, so I may get the result. So Mother says, God is not fish or vegetable that you can buy in the markets. Because the price we pay is linked, inseparably linked or connected to the tangible result that we get as a consequence of our efforts. So Mother says, God is not like fish or vegetable that you can buy him for a price. There is no such rule that the grace of God will fall on one simply because one is practicing austerity. It's a strong warning. Of course, we are coming to the subject. This can give rise to many thought currents, many conflicts in our mind. We are going to deal with the subject. In olden days, the great rishis and saints practiced austerity for thousands of years. Mythological story. With their feet up and head down and a lighted fire burning under them, even then only some of them received the grace of God. So this idea behind. In olden times, great saints practiced for so long and so hard, and yet all of them did not immediately achieve the highest spiritual enlightenment. And then the question arises, how do you explain self-effort? If our effort does not necessarily produce the result. It doesn't guarantee a tangible, definite result. Then why should you take all the trouble to do japa, meditation, everything? The mother comes forward with a new idea. Mother says that our effort is only to make ourselves grace worthy, to make our mind fit, ready for God's grace. God's grace is not the price we get. It is not the thing that we get for the price we pay. Price, human effort, and God's grace, the result. No. Our effort doesn't necessarily produce God's grace. Then what's the use of our effort? Our effort helps us to become ready to understand and make use of, to be worthy of God's grace. So to achieve grace worthiness is the real significance of human effort. So this is a cycle. We begin with self-effort. Then when we become grace worthy, we get the grace of God. At the third stage, we reach a level of non-effort. We begin with effort, we end with non-effort. The idea is this. When we practice austerities, our mind is purged of all negative, undesirable tendencies and impressions that stand in the way of realizing God's grace as God's grace, recognizing God's grace as God's grace. To give an example, if you are thinking of some ordinary, secular, non-spiritual topics, and if God comes to us, we may not recognize Him. If He enters here, we may think He has just come here to attend a retreat. But when you are praying and when you are meditating, when you are engaging in intense meditation, when our mind is focused on that spiritual ideal, when the mind is ready to understand God's grace, recognize God's grace, and when we are fit for God's grace, when we achieve grace worthiness, then we are able to understand God's grace. Next stage is the stage of non-effort. Naturalness, no struggle. We go beyond intellectuality, beyond struggle, and we reach a stage of total effortlessness after receiving God's grace. There are several examples in various scriptures, in Narada Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras, in Bhagavata, and also not only in the Confessions of Augustine, but also in one of the writings of Saint Teresa of Avila, where she takes the analogy of a gardener. So our mind is the garden, and we want to prepare our mind for God to come and see the beautiful garden. If the garden is full of beautiful flowers, with perfumed flowers, then God will come and enjoy this garden, which are hearts. But right now our mind is not really fit for that. It is full of weeds, stones, pebbles, grass, all undesirable things. So, most of you remember Jesus, the sower of the seed parable. So, if you throw the seeds of spirituality in this mind, nothing will grow. And if you irrigate and put manure, the weeds and grass will grow. So first the mind should be ready. The garden should be ready. But right now the garden is not yet ready for God's grace. So first of all, we have to remove all this undesirable growth from our mind. All undesirable tendencies, impressions gathered in previous life. According to Vedanta, most of the conflicts that we face in spiritual life are the conflicts between a pair of conflicting tendencies and impressions. Suddenly we feel a great attraction for spiritual ideas, and mind goes straight towards that. And we read some holy books, and we meditate, and we feel inspired. But then when we are placed in a different set of circumstances, mind goes to the other extreme. So mind moves as a pendulum from one extreme to another extreme. This is what really happened. This is the condition of majority of spiritual seekers, which Patanjali will call vikshipta, means the mind which is divided into two opposing, conflicting tendencies, groups of tendencies. So these undesirable weeds and growth and grass and pebbles and stones which lie spread all over the garden, this barren land or rather, should be cleaned first of all before we start irrigation. Now, spiritual practice is irrigation, concentration, meditation. So what happens is, we have first of all to keep our field ready. Now, how do we irrigate the field? This is a classic illustration from the first volume of the autobiographical writings of Saint Teresa of Avila. So she says, we can bring water, we can irrigate the field by bringing water maybe from a well. So we can use buckets, which will take a lot of effort. We can use windmill. We can cut a canal. There are various ways of bringing water to the field. But somehow we should bring water to the field. All of this will require effort. Now, meditation, reading of holy scriptures, discussion among fellow spiritual aspirants, even fighting and quarreling over different ideas of spirituality itself is helpful. So in many traditions, many medieval monasteries of Europe, they used to discuss different topics. That was prevalent in India's, in Hindu monastic traditions also. They will discuss, they will debate different philosophical ideas discussed in the scriptures. Debate will not take you to God, but debate on spiritual topics will drive away all undesirable thought currents. If we don't discuss and debate and quarrel over spiritual ideas, we will debate and quarrel over unspiritual ideas. So fight for spiritual ideas, because somehow the mind should be made ready. Now, to make the mind ready, we must irrigate the field. To irrigate the field is the goal of spiritual life, to make the mind ready for God's grace. For that, there are different ways. Now, suppose we are struggling hard to bring water from the nearby river to this field. Suddenly it starts raining. Then what happens? That's the best way of irrigating the garden. So, rain is like God's grace. If it starts raining, then you don't have to work hard at all. You can simply sit quiet somewhere, and the whole field will be irrigated much better than it will be done through human effort. But if we don't really work hard to keep our mind ready, then rains won't help you. If you are not taken care to remove all the pebbles and stones and weeds and grass, which the rains won't do. which we should do. Rains will come down equally, and if the field is full of weeds and grass, they will grow. So to remove the weeds and grass and pebbles and stones is human effort. So human effort makes us grace-worthy. It enables us to make proper use of God's grace. Otherwise, God's grace will not work. That's the idea behind. So that's why Mother stresses this point. God is not like fish or vegetable that you can buy him for a price. There is no such rule that the grace of God will fall on one simply because one is practicing austerity. It is only through his grace that one gets the vision of God. But one must practice meditation and japa that removes impurities of mind. So we find many of the great spiritual ideas mentioned in the classical devotional works are put in a simple language. We find mothers, one can write commentaries on the instruction, reminiscences of the Gospel of Holy Mothers. But some of the great ideas are mentioned in Bhagavata Purana. There are innumerable stories in the Bhagavata and Mahabharata. Hundreds in Mahabharata and scores in Bhagavata Purana, dealing with the importance of God's grace and human effort. All these are put in the language of everyday life situations by Mother. One must practice spiritual disciplines such as worship and so forth, as one gets the fragrance of a flower by handling it, or as one gets the smell of sandalwood by rubbing it against a stone. In the same way, one gets spiritual awakening by constantly thinking of God. But you can realize him right now if you become desireless. So once you become totally desireless, then you only you look thinking about God's realization when you pray. You pray for its own sake, and then the result is produced. So that's why Mother says, first human effort, then God's grace. The third stage, after receiving God's grace, we reach a stage of total spontaneity, naturalness, and complete freedom from struggle and effortless. A state of total effortlessness. But for that, one important condition is mentioned in the scriptures. One must go beyond logic and intellectual analysis. Is a very tricky point. You find most of the greatest intellectuals and logicians of different world traditions who attained realization of God recognized the limitation of intellect. One supreme example is Shankaracharya himself. Shankaracharya is supposed to be the greatest philosopher of Indian tradition, India's Vedantic tradition. And he is also the author of the most sublime, beautiful devotional poetry in Sanskrit language. Now he says, well, we need books. We should read Upanishads, Gita, Bible, and so on. Because we have to think, and to exercise our intellect, we need good ideas, noble ideas contained in the books. Thus it is said that to read without thinking is useless, to think without reading is dangerous. Now, what will you think if you don't have anything to think about? The mind will naturally project lower biological drives. That will be the focus of contemplation. If you don't feed the mind with good food. So mind, first of all, should be fed with good food. For that, we have to read. We need some ideas to contemplate on, to meditate upon, to think about. Now, so theology is necessary. Yukti, Sruti it is called, in Sanskrit called Sruti. Shankaracharya's motto is Srutya Yuktya Swanibhutya. The idea is this, a perfect logical reconciliation of theology, reason, and experience, mysticism. Now, first we read these great books. That's why Mother says one must study. One must be engaged in the study of Holy Scriptures, because mind is full of different ideas, not all of them healthy or helpful for spiritual life. Now, to counterbalance these unhealthy ideas, we must keep feeding the mind with healthy, helpful ideas, which we get only from books or by listening to spiritual teachers, spiritual seekers. So we need books. But then blind reading without thinking won't do. We must logically analyze and make these ideas our own. But that also is not enough. We must practice and reach some level of spiritual experience, this Swanubhuti. So theology, reason and mysticism all are reconciled. That's why it is said that we read books because we need to think. But thinking is not enough. We must also reach the level of experience. Now here one may imagine, it's likely that we may think we won't be able to fully understand this relationship. If God is full of mercy and kindness, then why can't He listen to us even if we do not do anything? Why can't God give us spiritual wisdom, spiritual knowledge without any effort? The reason is, if we get higher spiritual wisdom before we are ready, that spiritual knowledge won't be of any use to us. Often it can take us off the balance. I can give one striking example that's from Sri Ramakrishna's life. Sri Ramakrishna had a nephew. He was a good man, but and he served Sri Ramakrishna. His name was Hruday. He had his own way of practicing spirituality. So he thought, well, his uncle is a great spiritual teacher, so why can't he get some of this? He found Sri Ramakrishna's disciples like Vivekananda and others coming and learning from Sri Ramakrishna. So he also wanted Brahmajnanam, the ultimate Advaitic knowledge. So he used to pester his uncle. And once Sri Ramakrishna would tell him, no, you wait, you should wait for some time, it's not a time for you. But he used to pester. Now it is said that once Sri Ramakrishna gave him a glimpse of the highest spiritual knowledge. When you realize the same Brahman, same Atman is all pervading, it is immanent reality, it is the highest transcendental reality. When you completely transcend duality, you experience your total identity, non-difference and non-distinction with the omnipresent supreme reality or Atman. Once he gave a glimpse of this knowledge to his own nephew, who was really not ready mentally. What happened was, this man suddenly thought, oh Ramakrishna, we can teach the world now. He was elevated to such a position which he actually did not deserve. So what happened? Immediately he lost his balance. He thought, now that he has realized the highest spiritual knowledge, he can teach the world. Why should we make these people suffer so much? Let us distribute this Brahmajnanam, knowledge of Brahman, to everyone. Let the whole creation be spiritually enlightened. Sri Ramakrishna, you come down. So Sri Ramakrishna brought him down to the common level. And that was a great lesson for him. So you find that unless we are ready, we are fit for the highest spiritual knowledge, that spiritual realization will not be of much use to us. We can make use of only what we earn, not necessarily what we get. What we earn, that is ours. What we get need not necessarily be ours. We may not be able to make use of it. There are various examples in Sri Ramakrishna's life. The famous analogy of a person crossing the river. Sri Ramakrishna says in one context, a man who sits on the bank of the river wants to cross the river, but the boat is anchored, it's tied to an anchor on the bank of the river by a chain, and he is sitting there. Just by shouting, I want to cross the river, he won't be able to cross the river. First of all, he should get up, he should shed his lethargy, his laziness, and he should try to untie the chain that ties the boat to the anchor. Then he should row the boat for some distance till he reaches the midstream. And then only he will be able to make use of the wind that is blowing in the river. So even to be able to make use of God's grace, we must reach some level of spiritual progress, which is necessary and which is possible only through human effort. So many of these great, subtle, profound ideas which are mentioned in scriptures and mystical works are put by Mother in the very simple language. See, God is not like fish or vegetable that you can buy him for a price. Sometimes our ego makes us feel, well, I have practiced so much and God is not responding. I am not making enough progress. That sometimes takes people to the extreme level of agnosticism or atheism. So people sometimes get drawn away from spiritual path. So in such context, Mother says, well, remember, you cannot trade, you cannot be a trader in spiritual life. You make your own effort. Even the desire for God's realization is only a step to go beyond that. So their Mother says, you should practice, at the same time, you should not imagine that just because you have practiced, it should be given to you. So the total reconciliation between these apparently conflicting ideas of self-effort and God's grace, predetermination and our independent will. All these subtle points of spiritual life are explained in Mother's instructions in a very simple language of everyday life situations. Now we will have half an hour interaction, which may be much more fruitful when we discuss a topic like this. So you can raise any important, any related spiritual topics, and we can have an interaction for half an hour, more than half an hour.
Swamiji, so the grace, in some cases, they say that, like there is a story in Kadamrita that the guy got the grace of Mother and with very little effort, and then he is asking Mother that, can I ask you a question, and how come I got your grace with so little effort, where the other aspirant who was trying to get to you got eaten up by the tiger? And Mother is saying that you don't know your previous births, what you have done. So looks like that grace looks like a window from the single birth. But if you can see all the birth, then it kind of adds up.
Well, if we were busy removing all the pebbles and stones and weeds in previous life, and in this life the garden is almost ready for irrigation, then it starts raining all of a sudden. Because you have earned it. As I said, if we interpret human life as a single birth phenomenon, we are seeing only the tip of the iceberg. If an iceberg has 100, only 10 feet is visible above the water level, and 90 feet of the iceberg below the water level. So often when we interpret these scriptures, we interpret it assuming that life is one. But in many cases, wherever you find some strange phenomena, some spiritual seekers suddenly getting spiritual enlightenment, it is because that person has made his field ready in previous life. This is not only in the case of spiritual life, even in intellectual life. If you find a person showing some special prodigal power, faculty to understand a topic, to study a language, to master a subject, it's because that person was already familiar with this. In this life, it is only revision. So that's why we had to look at the iceberg, not only above the water level, but also below the water level. So another example is striking example from Mother's life. When Holy Mother was visiting Saranath, a few miles away from Benares, a very interesting incident took place. It's mentioned in the reminiscences and also in the Gospel. Saranath is very close to Benares. That's the place where Buddha preached for the first time after he got enlightenment. And that's a place associated with ancient temples and Buddhist pagodas dating back maybe 4th century BC, or maybe earlier. Now, Mother was visiting this place. She had gone to Benares. She went to our Sevashrama, where now we are running a hospital. Then she went to Saranath with a group of devotees and disciples. And there were a group of European visitors. They were closely watching, staring at these ancient relics of Buddhist temples, Hindu temples and pagodas, and admiring. And mind you, this was the early decades of 20th century. So some of Mother's Indian disciples asked Mother, how do you explain this? These foreigners, Europeans, staring at these relics with great admiration. Then Mother said, look here, they are the people who built all this in their previous life. Now they are coming watching over this. So where do we stand? If life is a cycle, where is the beginning, where is the end? So often in our life, when we have a special attraction or even aversion, that also, for something, all this can only be explained in the light of tendencies and impressions gathered, not in this life, in previous life. So, not only in spiritual life, but in spiritual life it becomes so pronounced. We are those who are able to meditate for long hours without much effort, spontaneously. The mind is ready. Mind gets naturally focused on the spiritual topic because the field is almost ready. Not many pebbles and stones and weeds and grass. When the field is full of grass and weeds and stones, then the moment you try to meditate, all these will come to the surface. And you feel restless, you feel like running away from your seat, from the room. So if you feel a natural attraction, a spontaneity, and a kind of effortlessness, naturalness, spontaneity and effortlessness, when we try to meditate or yoga, it means the field is relatively free. Now the question arises, how to make the field ready? Our scriptures give the impression. Mother also repeats the same idea on innumerable occasions. Keep on doing good things. Keep on doing good things. Speak. We need not worry, how many weeds are there, pebbles and stones are there in the field, I must pick them up. No. We must go on doing good things, thinking good thoughts, speaking good words, and by contributing more and more, reinforcing our mind with more and more positive tendencies through positive actions, we can turn the mental balance in favor of spiritual life. Then spiritual life becomes easy. The point is, when spiritual practice becomes natural to us, it means we are making rapid progress. It means the field is ready. When we feel that it is unnatural, well, everything is fine, but I cannot sit quiet for a minute. That means mind is not ready. So, when we sit somewhere, and if you can watch how our mind, where our mind goes, in which direction it moves, that will explain where we stand. That's the idea. So if you find people with special powers of concentration, it means they've already made substantial progress in previous life.
Swamiji, the way you're describing grace doesn't make it sound like grace. Because to me, grace means you get it. But it sounds like Mother is keeping a track of everything we've done, and she's like, oh, she's completed so many hours, so that doesn't sound like grace.
Yeah.
So,
Sri Ramakrishna answers your question. Sri Ramakrishna says, Mother, God is like mother. Now, she has many children. Most of the children are happy, they are eating chocolates, they are playing with toys. But one child throws away all this and cries. Mother goes to that child. Now, suppose the mother goes to other children who are eating chocolates. They know, no, mother, don't come to me, I'm eating chocolates. They feel disturbed if mother goes to them. But a child who throws away the chocolates and toys, she or he will be happy if mother goes to her. So we won't be able to recognize mother's grace unless our mind is ready for that. The wind is always blowing, but the boat should be ready, positioned accordingly. Otherwise the wind may not help us. So grace is always there. That is Sri Ramakrishna's thesis. Grace is always there. But who wants? Children who are eating chocolates, you ask them, if mother calls them, they won't come to mother. Those who are driving the small kids, they won't go to mother. They'll be happy riding the bicycle. But at one stage, the child throws away all this. Then if mother calls the mother, that child will be happy. Otherwise, mother's presence, they will consider nuisance, in fact. If mother comes and takes away the bicycle, come to me, that child won't be very happy. She will consider it a big intrusion, nuisance. So we will be able to recognize mother's grace as mother's grace only when we leave everything behind and follow me. Jesus said same. Something should be left behind, and we should be able to focus our whole attention on one point. Then only we will be able to recognize the worth of that. That's the idea. I think it's clear?
Swami, you mentioned that mother is the supreme, right? And it gives grace. And the child imbibes everything from that grace. Having said that, don't you think it is essential for all of us who want to have the grace to become a child, behave like a child, be truthful like a child? So the mother automatically would give you the grace if you become that.
Just as in a mother, if children are playing with toys, mother knows that if she goes the the children won't receive her with great attention. I said just children, small kids who are playing with toys won't welcome a mother's intrusion unless that child gets bored with playing or eating too many chocolates. At one point, the child feels that mother's presence is the most precious thing, more precious than anything else. Then only mother's presence will be appreciated, will be useful to the child. Like that, unless our mind is ready for it, we won't be able to fully make use of God's grace. That's the idea behind. God's grace is always there. Many people need some strong blows, mind you. Without that, they won't turn to God. There are very few people who have the wisdom to make a choice early enough and take a decision early enough. But of course, again, it's a matter of evolution, not choice. When we reach a stage that spirituality is necessary, essential for peace of mind, and all other things put together cannot replace spirituality, cannot give us lasting peace of mind, then only we turn towards higher spiritual ideas. So that stage is necessary. It corresponds to the children throwing away toys and chocolates. Unless we reach that stage of evolution, we won't be able to understand even intellectual ideas. See, you go to a public place and talk about God's grace, they will not be able to understand. They will become hostile towards you. It's like any other secular topic. You teach children music who are not interested in music. They will hate music, they will hate you also. So unless we reach a particular stage of evolution, we won't be able to think beyond the empirical, beyond the phenomenal, what lies beyond. Well, you have everything that we can think of, money, wealth, status, everything. Still you feel an inner vacuum. That feeling comes only to people who have somewhat evolved beyond limits. Because often our desire, in a way, what we desire for, in a way, reveals where we stand. So, the higher desire, highest motivation for spiritual ideas comes only when we reach a relatively high level of evolution. It's like children throwing away toys and chocolates.
Swamiji, when you say that remove the pebbles, remove the weeds, get the soil ready for fertile, are you trying to indicate that about Indriyas, which is there, 5 of them, which creates all the problem for us, control them?
Well, the point is, for a spiritual seeker, for a beginner, controlling the Indriyas, controlling the 5 senses of perception or mind, really is an impossibility. What is needed? Diverting the mind and the 5 senses of perception to a creative spiritual channel. Really speaking, even when Patanjali talks about the control of the mind, what he means is sublimation of the mind. Controlling means withdrawing the mind away from sense objects. But that's not possible without diverting the mind to a higher spiritual channel. So, focusing on the spiritual ideal is nothing but diverting the mind away from sensory objects. So you talk about Indriyas. Mind is being constantly drawn towards senses of perception, towards different sense objects through these 5 Indriya, Pancha Jnanendriyas. So these Pancha Jnanendriyas of 5 senses of perception, like eyes, ears, sense of touch, sense of sound, sense of smell, all these 5. they are constantly taking the mind away towards sense objects. And they are constantly taking the mind away from God. When we are interacting with the sense objects, then God is non-existent, unreal, and God is unreal. When we focus the mind on God, then the sense objects are only relative. They are unreal. So we cannot keep the mind focused on both. For a spiritual seeker, slowly focusing more and more on the spiritual ideal is a way of diverting the mind away from the sense objects. You do not forcibly take the mind away. Suppose you take a decision, I will not see that object anymore. Take a decision and you keep your eyes closed. You'll be always seeing that object mentally. And if you, suppose you take a decision where I won't hear that sound, you'll be always hearing the sound mentally. Once I mentioned this, say, a man who was getting bald head, he was losing his hair. He wanted to make fun of an Ayurvedic physician. So do you have a medicine for bald-headedness, losing hair? So he said, you never think of an egg. Egg is the shape of a bald head, empty head. So this man took a strong decision never to think of an egg. Which means from that moment onwards, he was constantly struggling not to think of an egg. But without thinking of an egg, you cannot think of not focusing on it. So he became completely bald-headed, lost all his hair. So the point is, we can never really take the mind away forcibly. Mind will go towards that. So mind can only be diverted slowly towards the spiritual ideal, and simultaneously the mind will get drawn away from sense objects. That's the idea behind. There is no question of forcibly withdrawing the senses from sense objects. It is impossible. So that is why Patanjali is Ishvara Pradhana Dva. He gives a big option. He says, well, all the yama, niyama, everything, 5 yamas and 4 niyama. Then he says, well, you surrender, resign everything to God. Once you resign everything to God, then you replace all other sense objects and thought currents and tendencies with one great tendency, God. So mind is sublimated, drawn away from sense objects. That's the idea.
So Maharaj, once, let's say somebody gets a grace, a mother's grace, and that's the first step. But there's a long way to go to make a spiritual progress. So how do you keep your attitude to really not to lose that grace again? Because mind constantly slips and goes towards sense objects and all this. So what attitude and how do you digest that kind of grace and make further progress?
In the beginning, this is a problem, but slowly when we make conscious effort, if not through active meditation, through service, through reading, somehow connects our activities, thought currents and our personality to the spiritual. That can be done not only through meditation or japa, service, reading, any means, by any means, somehow we must link ourselves with the spiritual ideal. And God's grace is not really lost. It is always there. We have to make our boat ready for it. We have to position our boat in such a way that the wind that is blowing becomes helpful for your journey. So any kind of effort, if not through meditation, through gross efforts, see, activities involving karmendriyas, mean the 5 senses of action, are comparatively easy. Thinking may be difficult. Say, activities involving mind and 5 senses of perception may be, those activities we cannot control. but activities involving mind and five senses of action that we can control somehow. They should be diverted towards a spiritual ideal. So whatever we do, think, talk, or whatever it is, they should be given a spiritual orientation. It is the first step in spiritual life. Give a spiritual orientation to whatever we do, think, or act. Spirituality doesn't mean sitting in a ram road straight and meditation. No. Spirituality means somehow linking the mind to the spiritual. That's a very important point, remember. If you read the teachings of Holy Mother, you find Holy Mother is not always focusing on on this discipline. You should sit straight with muscular, this yoga, meditation. That's not Holy Mother is speaking about. You find in Holy Mother's teachings, there is very little mention of the active, the highly rigid spiritual practices involving long hours of meditation in forest. No. Mother is mostly addressing people who are facing problems in everyday life situations. Housewives, sometimes children going astray, sometimes widows whose husbands have died, or spiritual seekers who are facing conflicts. So there Mother gives some instructions which help them to link their mind back to God through karma yoga, service activities involving the five senses of action, or karmendriyas, and mind. That's somehow linking ourselves to spiritual ideal. That's what Mother is talking about. So then grace will not be lost. The idea of losing grace doesn't arise, because grace is always there. The only question is how to make ourselves grace worthy. That's the whole business. We shouldn't know, I have got grace now, I may lose it. No. We never got grace because it's always there. We can get something only if that doesn't exist already. It already exists. The whole human effort should be to make ourselves worthy of God's grace. So to achieve God's grace worthiness is the goal of all activities and spiritual practices in the devotional philosophy.
Isn't God's grace involved in just having the idea to make the effort?
Idea?
In order to have the idea to make the effort.
Yes, that's true.
That's grace of God itself.
Yes. In fact, yeah, that's true. And that's true, Siddhartha refers to this point, but further interpreters have given more explanation. Again, go back to the old analogy. A man sitting on the bank of a river, trying to cross the river, he should shake off his lethargy, laziness. He should row the boat to the midstream, then only he will be able to make use of the wind that is blowing. Okay. Now, once he reaches the midstream, and he finds that the wind that's blowing is helping him to cross the river, then he realizes, well, it's because of God's grace that I could shake off my lethargy. So, but that we realize only when we get God's grace. Before that stage, we divide the whole scheme into two compartments, self-effort and God's grace. But once we reach that state of total effortlessness, the stage of non-effort, then we realize even the effort involved in achieving grace-worthiness was because of God's grace. But that's a later realization. That's the idea.
Maharaj, is there a measurement of success that I'm making the effort? I'm getting there?
See, we feel a kind of inner contentment or inner discontentment, spiritual discontentment. Spiritual discontentment is sometimes interpreted as a sign of making progress at the early stage. Spiritual contentment is the later stage. So once we start the journey and make some progress, then only we feel that we have not made enough progress. Unless you have made some progress, you won't feel that you have not made enough progress, because you realize there is a lot more progress yet to be made. But when you reach a higher level of evolution, then you feel discontentment. This idea.
How do you define the progress, Swamiji? When you say progress, how do you spiritual progress?
As I said,
How do you define that?
yes, contentment. Contentment is from one perspective, discontentment from another perspective. Total discontentment with other non-spiritual achievements is a measure of progress. Total contentment is the measure of progress at a higher level. Even to feel totally discontented, totally dissatisfied with worldly attainments is a measure of progress. Normal people won't do that. So that's why I said even to intellectually withstand the onslaught of spiritual ideas needs a higher level of progress. Many people cannot stand this, So, contentment is at the highest level, divine or spiritual discontentment at the lower level. The Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and Chandilya Sutra all mention this point. It's a sign of progress.
Contentment can also bring stagnation, isn't it?
Not in spiritual life. In spiritual life, there is no stagnation. It may be all right in other areas, but in spiritual life, the real santosha, it is called. That santosha, samyak tosha, I mean the highest all-round inner contentment, which comes when you feel that you have achieved something beyond which there is nothing to seek for. So that is a kind of inner fulfillment. We feel an inner completeness within. That doesn't lead to stagnation. See, too much of spirituality, nobody suffers from too much of spirituality. Other things all right. But an overdose of spirituality, an overdose of spiritual contentment doesn't create problems. That's true. That's true. Overdose is a problem only in other areas, non-spiritual areas. Yes, that's a Purnamada Purnamidam. That's when Purna actually means both become same. Whole life gets spiritualized. So how to think of stagnation? So we feel an inner completeness, inner fulfillment. It is a state which can only be experienced but cannot be explained. That's the idea. Right.
So, Maharaj, in this context, could you explain the meaning of Guru Kripahi Kevalam?
Yes, Guru is one who helps you to enter the path. And often we take a path seriously only if we respect the one who teaches, who directs you towards that path. So, in fact, the earnestness, the shraddha, the intensity with which we follow the instructions of the Guru is very vital. This is even in secular life. Suppose you learn music. If you have no respect for the music teacher, you will never become a great musician. Because your earnestness, your total dedication to music, if it is real, then you will have the same respect and reverence for the teacher who teaches that music which you honor, which you care for so much. So very often these are all interrelated. So in spiritual life also. So it's not that Guru gives you in a platter realization. Your respect, your shraddha, your reverence for the Guru makes enables you to make use of the Guru in the form of an instrument in the hands of God. Something like a wire that is plugged to the source of electricity. If it is not properly plugged with great care, it will not help you if the current will not flow through it. So when we respect our Guru, revere our Guru, then God's grace is open before you. If you don't have it, then it's like if the plug is not properly plugged, so the electricity won't flow. That's the idea. So we have just about 3 minutes more. If you have no question, then we'll conclude.
Swami, the mind directed to God will still act within its limitation, isn't it? So how can it
That's
that
why.
idea of
Again, we are trying to logically explain something which can only be experienced. This is a big problem in spiritual life. Spiritual life begins when we stop logical analysis. Or logical analysis, inference, direct perception and inference are related to our empirical knowledge. Even little bit of spiritual experience goes beyond the realm of logic. So if we go on analyzing how it happens, we are analyzing, trying to intellectually analyze something which cannot be intellectually analyzed, which can only be experienced. So in spiritual life, the great mystery and also secret is this: unless we make the first step, we will never be able to understand it. In all other sciences, we can use our intellect, reasoning power, logically analyze. But in spiritual life, it's like a little bit of a prick of the needle is necessary to feel the pain. Otherwise, if we sit and analyze logically, rationalize things, we won't be able to understand it. Spirituality is essentially an experience-based science. That's the idea. So we will continue our discussion at 3:30. Now we will have refreshments till 12 o'clock, and then from 12 to 12:30 meditation, 12:30 to 3:30 free time, 3:30 to 5 p.m. discussion, the same subjects. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ram Krishna Namaste.